January 6, 2021 was worse for me than September 11, 2001. And I know that might sound messed up coming from a combat veteran, somebody who served in the post 9/11 era, to compare a day where we lost more than 3,000 Americans with a day where just a few Americans died. The reason that I say January 6, 2021 was worse is because on that day, that terrorist attack was committed by our fellow Americans, waving American flags. On September 11, 2001, we were attacked by a foreign enemy, and that was horrific, and it was traumatizing. I was born and raised in New York. I was in Long Island. Lots of people around me lost their loved ones. I was lucky personally, I didn't lose anyone. But I remember some of my friends' parents who work in the city, who work on Wall Street, who work near the towers, coming home shell-shocked. But on January 6, 2021, I had friends who were working in the Capitol that day. I had a buddy who was in uniform, a police officer, who was getting beaten by Americans. This guy was a combat veteran too. He was someone who served in the military after September 11th because he wanted to serve and protect our democracy. He came home from war, put on another uniform and a badge, and for that, Americans waving American flags tried to kill him. Another difference between September 11, 2001 and January 6, 2021 is I don't have any survivor's guilt or any sort of really complicated feelings about September 11th. Yes, there are many factors that led to September 11th, but I was a kid. We were attacked by a foreign enemy. I was pretty easily able to internalize that as there are good guys and there are bad guys here. And I know that as a kid, there is absolutely nothing that I could have done to have changed that situation. But in 2020 and leading up to January 6th and every day since, I was infiltrating these extremist organizations, gathering evidence of their criminality, of their plans, recording videos and audio of them documenting how they were planning to perform raids on Capitol buildings at the state level before January 6th. I feel like my entire industry was screaming from the rooftops that something was about to happen. I was recording interviews of veterans joining extremist organizations, talking about how they were ready to end the lives of their fellow Americans because of their political beliefs, how they were prepared to take on police officers and potentially the National Guard. I was recording audio of extremists in groups like the 3% Security Force talk about the weapons that they were stockpiling. And I was providing that information to the FBI. I was providing that information to journalists. But despite all that, on January 6th, I watched the same thing that the rest of you saw on television. But because I knew who these extremists were ahead of time, I was also watching their live streams. So I wasn't just watching what the news cameras were catching, which was horrific in and of itself, but I was watching the insurrection from the visual perspective of the insurrectionists. I was watching them live stream their attack. I was listening to them gleefully assaulting police officers. Again, one of whom was my friend. I watched live as they were calling out, "Where's Nancy?" And my friends work for Nancy Pelosi. Again, I, as a former lobbyist, as someone who worked for a veteran service organization on Capitol Hill for years leading up to 2020, I had a lot of friends on Capitol Hill, members of Congress, people that I worked with every day who this violent mob were hunting down. For years before that, working for veteran service organizations, I was ringing the alarm bells about how foreign adversaries were targeting and radicalizing troops and veterans against our country. How they were spreading conspiracy theories, not just related to the election, but related to everything in politics. Pitting veterans against immigrants and refugees and the LGBTQ community and various racial communities. And it felt like no one was paying attention. I have dedicated my entire adult life to advocating on behalf of veterans, for veterans, working on things like veterans healthcare and GI Bill. But as I was studying the way that misinformation and disinformation was affecting my community, Republicans didn't want to hear it because they knew that keeping people outraged with disinformation, it didn't matter if it was coming from Tucker Carlson or Vladimir Putin himself. This disinformation was making people angry and making them vote for the GOP. So they stonewalled every effort by the Democrats who were trying to take my research seriously. We had a congressional hearing that no one even seemed to know about because it happened in the middle of the impeachment. And during that hearing, while Democrats were asking questions about my research, and I succeeded in getting executives from Twitter and Facebook dragged before the House Committee on Veterans Affairs, the Republicans spent their entire time lying and whining about how these social media companies are so mean to conservatives. Meanwhile, the research shows that conservative voices, conservative propagandists, are the most prominent accounts across all of social media, because outrage, lies, and disinformation has always been prominent on social media. Outrage makes you share and like and comment on a video more than positive content. Sure, some people come to social media for puppies and kittens, but the stuff that influences people online are the same things that influence people who watch cable television, and Fox News has trained an entire generation to be permanently outraged and afraid. And those people vote for the GOP. People who cater and pander to their fears based on nothing. And they, in turn, become supportive of political violence against people like me and my friends, people who are serving this country in real ways. The first person to die on January 6th was a veteran, Ashley Babbitt, and she was someone whose mind was warped by disinformation, who believed Donald Trump's Stop the Steal lie. She was shot because she felt so convinced by these lies and this narrative that she was being a hero by jumping through a window to hunt down members of Congress. She died for the lies and the disinformation that I had spent years researching and writing about. She died because people in my industry, when we were trying to warn everyone, law enforcement, the general public, journalists, about what was going to happen because people were preparing and training for violence leading up to January 6th. Because we weren't able to get enough attention, Ashley Babbitt died. Shortly after, Brian Sicknick, another veteran, a police officer, someone who had dedicated his entire adult life to serving his country. Brian Sicknick died because people like Ashley Babbitt had been so convinced by disinformation that he, wearing the uniform, wearing an American flag on his shoulder, that he was the enemy. And after all of this, the man who incited the riot, the man who seeded the disinformation about a stolen election, this man and his movement made heroes out of people who tried to end our democracy. And then not only did our law enforcement and judicial system fail to hold that man accountable, when given the chance to hold that person accountable again, more than half of voters, the American public, re-elected Donald Trump. And that is why January 6th will always be worse than 9/11 for me.